So in this video, I'm talking about what can you do as a natural athlete to keep on going when you see so many people around you using drugs and making these fantastic transformations in really short periods of time while you're feeling like you're not even getting anywhere. Comparisons can often be the mortal enemy of any type of internal peace and happiness. And so it's really important as a natural athlete to keep in mind that your path is a very different one and shouldn't be compared to someone else's. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I stayed natural and how I kept myself on the path without being overcome by the sheer amount of time it takes to make even some small amounts of progress and finding true joy and true satisfaction, not just in the progress, but in the process to create the progress in the first place. Something I think separates the natural athlete from the ones who use drugs. Stay tuned and I'll talk more about this. So in this video, I'm talking about how do you stay natural, not use drugs when people around you are transforming, when you have people on social media who look completely unreal, both male and female, totally unreal, miles ahead from where you are. And sometimes you see them in person go so far past where you are, and you're wondering, how am I going to catch up? And should I even catch up? Before I go any further, I'd like to take some time to acknowledge all the tremendous support I've had so far for this channel. Thank you so much to every single one of you, especially those who talk about the fact that they think that this video series and channel should be a resource that's more popular. Be sure to share it and also be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell as well so you're first in line when the new content comes out, because I'm always working to create new content just for you. So on to the topic at hand. How do you stay natural in a world where being natural is looked at very much these days as a disadvantage? First of all, I'll talk about my own path and my own journey. I had the opportunity to use drugs very early on in my career. I had done my first bodybuilding competition in the teenage category back in Trinidad and Tobago, and was confronted by the reality that in order to compete at the very highest levels of bodybuilding, I would have to use drugs. And that drug use was pretty much ubiquitous. That the physiques that I looked at, the people who I looked to for inspiration, the athletes who I thought were only separated from where I was by a matter of time, were separated really not just by a matter of time, but also by a matter of drugs. I would look at the Mr. Olympia competitions back then and think that maybe one day if I worked really, really hard, really applied myself, I too could step on, the highest stages of professional bodybuilding because I was willing to work harder than anyone to get there. And so it was a real shock for me to realize that there was this very tangible barrier that could not be passed without using anabolic steroids. Even the degree of definition that was achieved by some of the competitors wasn't so much a matter of the fact that they were 100% on their diet and really meticulous about every single thing that they ate. They pretended that that was the reason why they were so successful. But the reality is that drugs was a major part in the reason why they looked the way they looked. And there's no getting around it. No matter how much they try to pretend otherwise, I can tell you for a fact, having seen it for myself, it's the mastery of knowing what to do when you're on drugs to get to where you want to be. And it's also the ability to take some risks that other people probably would not take in the pursuit of winning a trophy or a title. That's something I wasn't interested in. I got into bodybuilding for very practical reasons, which is probably one of the reasons why I stayed drug free. I was a kid who got horribly bullied growing up. I mean, horribly bullied to the point where it was almost every single day I had to endure beatings in the schoolyard when I was in elementary school. It was really, really hard. And I started martial arts as a way, not so much to fight back, but be in a place where I wouldn't have to be a victim anymore. And I got to a point where I was pretty formidable. In fact, by the time I got to high school, I never had to worry at all about being a victim. as long as someone knew who I was. I was 6 feet tall at 125 pounds when I started training, and extremely skinny, as you'd probably figure out by those statistics. And as such, if you didn't know who I was, I looked like an easy target. And I think that was the problem for me growing up. I looked weak. I looked frail. And bodybuilding for me was about having achieved a certain degree of prowess in martial arts and being able to really fight, because I had to really fight. But even though I could fight, it only really worked with those who knew who I was. If I was in the streets, someone who didn't know who I was would try to rob me. And I got attempts to be mugged multiple times. And I rationalized that if I became bigger and stronger and got to a place where my outside matched my insides and my ability, I would no longer be a target. Everything else came secondary to that. I love comic books. I loved how those characters looked. Obviously, you can tell by what I'm wearing right now. And that was a major influence for me. But if I'm being 100% honest, it was really about creating a suit of armor that I could wear that would allow me to walk unhindered growing up in Trinidad. Honestly, that's really where it came from. I had no idea that there was a social component to it. I had no idea that become more popular as a result. And when I started bodybuilding, it was a very personal journey. And when I saw the results happening, when I felt the fantastic feeling of being in the gym and training and seeing results from my hard work, it became part of my lifestyle. And by the time I was 17 years old, I decided to compete in a bodybuilding competition as a teenager in my very first competition, and I came dead last, having trained as hard as I could, having done everything I could, and stepped on stage looking left and right and realizing that there was something going on here that I wasn't part of. And back then, the competitors were very open about it. In fact, they would ask me, what drugs are you using? And very few of them were not using drugs. And for me, it became this pressure because I had bought into bodybuilding. I had bought into the idea of becoming a bodybuilder. I loved the idea of it. I loved the idea of pushing myself and see how far I could go. I loved the fact that I was able to transform myself from this skinny 125-pound kid into where I was for my first competition at 175 pounds. I was really proud of that. But I have to say, it was a real hit and blow to my ego, the fact that I came dead last and felt like I didn't even belong on the stage. And so at that point, I started considering using drugs. And interestingly enough, I had people approach me saying, hey, we saw you compete and you have tremendous potential. You could be a Mr. Olympic competitor one day. You have the frame for it. You have the work ethic, and you're young enough where if you start now, you could really be a force to be reckoned with. And so all of a sudden I had not just the opportunity, but the means. But here I was faced with a road that was veering in two directions, and I had to make a choice. And when I thought about bodybuilding as a career, and when I thought about the idea of using drugs and what it entailed, I looked around me. And I saw my friends, the ones who all use drugs. And I took the rose-colored glasses off and really looked at them. And a lot of them had some serious problems. And they would talk openly about it, some really serious problems. They had problems. Their wives had problems. They had health problems. And I thought about the fact that they seemed to be truly consumed by bodybuilding and the quest for that win and for being better and bigger. And I didn't have that. I didn't want that. I couldn't see myself following that path, and respectfully so, because to be quite honest, my goal was to get to a point where I just wasn't a victim anymore, where I could walk down the street and not have to worry about anyone looking at me as the person that they want to think about jumping. I didn't have that anymore. I was big enough where I looked like a formidable opponent, which was my goal, my initial goal. It wasn't about morality. It wasn't about being better than anybody else and making this moral decision to take the higher road. It really was not at all. It really was, this wasn't for me. I had achieved my goals and I was going to find a path where I would see how far I could go. Now, at the time, it's important to bear in mind that I didn't know that natural bodybuilding existed. The only competitions I knew about were NPC and IFBB competitions, which were not drug tested. And our local competitions were not drug tested either. So for me, competitive bodybuilding was essentially over. I would go on to compete in several more competitions back home because I figured I'm going to keep on going, not with the idea of being the best bodybuilder on stage and being able to blow everybody away, but every single time I step on stage, I'm going to be better than I was last time. And that's going to have to be my satisfaction. It was very hard having people tell me that I had so much potential and that I wasn't going all the way. It was very hard as a competitive person hearing and having to resign myself to the fact that I would never even be able to hold a candle to the lowest of the low on the professional bodybuilding stages because I wasn't going to use drugs. It did hurt. It did wear on me. It did feel like a weight. And what I think frustrated me the most was seeing people who didn't work anywhere near as hard as I did, who didn't have anywhere near as much adherence to their diet as I did, who would just surpass me. They just fly right by me as if I was going backwards. And to be honest, there were so many times when looking at my progress looked like I was not really achieving much of anything because I understood that no matter how long I kept at this, unless I lived to be 200 or 400 years old, I'd never get to where some of the people who I saw who had achieved what they had achieved within the course of like 2 years. It just looks impossible. And it was incredibly frustrating. And it is incredibly frustrating. I understand anyone who goes through it. But what I did, what gave me solace was the fact that everything that I had gained was mine. I wasn't going to disappear because I'd also seen people stop using steroids because of health problems and watch them completely transform, not just physically, but their whole identity would transform. I would see the depression. I would see the feeling of being lost from being someone so big and so strong and so massive to someone who's simply not. And I saw as well that so many of them identified themselves as bodybuilders. Whereas if I'm being very honest with you, I don't identify myself as a bodybuilder. These muscles and everything are great, but when I see myself as myself, I don't see the muscles. I was me long before the muscles came. And I think that helped. The fact that I had a foundation of who I was. And it was never about impressing anyone. It was never about winning a trophy. It was never about being on television. It was never about fame. It still isn't. It always came down to this introverted kid who just wanted to be left alone and was using bodybuilding as a way to work a little harder to get to where he wanted to be. And that was enough. If I had gotten into bodybuilding trying to be noticed, trying to have more attention to myself, trying to not be the skinny kid in the background and instead be this big muscular guy in the foreground and the spotlight, I think I may have actually considered using steroids because then what other people thought of me would have been really important. And it really wasn't. In fact, it never has been. Bodybuilding from the perspective of someone doing it as a skinny kid was not at all something that I would say made me more popular. It, in fact, made things sometimes worse because for the first several years of my bodybuilding career, all that happened was people would make fun of me. They'd make fun of the skinny kid going to the gym religiously they'd make fun of this skinny kid again, eating chicken breasts and white rice and not drinking and not doing a lot of things everybody else was doing and not making that much in the way of progress. So bodybuilding really wasn't something that was this popular idea for me at all. It was really me doing my own thing. I just kept it that way. This is going to be me doing my own thing for me. And in those dark moments when I would look at people and have that sense of despair, especially the teenager, watching others just pass me, I would just ground myself in the idea that if I did that, I would always, in my quiet moments, be aware of the fact that I didn't do it the way I wanted to do it. And that what I looked like was a result of what I was using, not what I was doing. And that didn't sit well with me. I also had the privilege and benefit of extremely good mentorship. I had the mentorship of my martial arts teachers who also instilled in me a very Eastern perspective, and that the only way to truly achieve mastery and fulfillment is by letting yourself and accepting the idea that it's going to take you not years to achieve your goals, but decades. I was focused and fixated on where I wanted to go. The popularity that came with me achieving more in bodybuilding and getting bigger and stronger, I couldn't really see it. I was too busy. Sometimes watching others, passing me that and the other, I realized the distraction. If I could see it, it meant that I wasn't focused enough. I needed to focus more on where I was going. When I had the days when I felt like I wasn't making any progress, I had to go back to my routine. And again, routine is key, because the routine of eating properly and the routine of training really hard and always going to your limit, that routine is an expression of how much you love what you do. That's what it was for me, because I love training. I love eating well. I love feeling good. I love being this. And this is all part of it. It's all part of a cycle of love and self-care and self-appreciation, which I couldn't see happening if I was on a path that involved anabolic steroids. And to make a long story short, when I came to the United States, started training at Fifth Avenue Gym, I was training there for 4 years before the owner came to me and told me to compete in a natural bodybuilding competition. And I asked him, I said, what's a natural bodybuilding competition? I had no idea what it was, even though I was in the mecca of natural bodybuilding for 4 years. And so I did start competing in natural bodybuilding competitions. And in a way, had I taken that other path, I wouldn't have been able to be where I am today. And I'm extremely grateful for the fact that I took this path. There have been many a times when I've looked and said, career-wise, if I did use drugs, I'd probably be far more popular than I am. But again, even as a personal trainer whose job relies on popularity, as far as marketing is concerned, it just didn't feel right. It's not me. This is who I am. This is who I try to be. And I think that in the times when you really feel that you're tempted by the idea of using drugs or going that path, it's important not just to burn that hole in where you want to be and really see it and visualize it, but remember too that as you do that, you're inspiring so many others to do the same. And I think that we all have to be true to ourselves and try to make sure that the decisions that we make that are going to allow us in our quiet moments when we're alone with ourselves to be at peace. Because that's what I want. And that's what I've always had. I've always trained, always done what I've done, and had a lasting peace at the end of the day. And I can look in the mirror and say, well, it doesn't always look the way I want it to look, but it's mine. And you know what? I learned to love it. And self-love is important. You have to love yourself. You can't think that using that drug is going to somehow magically make you different and make you happy, because it's not. I don't know people who use drugs who are happier than those who don't. It also made it easier for me to stay on the natural path, because I understand the frustration of drug use. I understand all the trials and tribulations that they have to go through. And that's not something that I personally would like to go through. And I think I can use the analogy of the drug addict eating garbage to try to find food because they spend all their money on drugs. And while they're eating out of a garbage can, they're doing everything possible to entice their friends to use drugs too. Steroid use is a little bit like that, in that steroid users tend to be very, very magnanimous about how fantastic everything is and create this really swayed reality that you'll be so happy if you use drugs. When you talk to them on a one-on-one basis and you really know them, you see the depression, you see the health problem, you see the problems with always looking over your shoulder and wondering if people are going to find out you're using drugs when you're saying you're natural, because there are a lot of athletes out there who say that they're drug free, but aren't. And they admit it in their private moments. They do, because it's a strain, it's a burden. Who wants to carry that? And you remember that. You don't want to carry that. You want to be yourself. Always be true to yourself, because you're true to yourself, learn to love yourself. And those gains will take decades to come. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sit down here and tell you that magically you'll one day look at drug using bodybuilders, just keep at it forever. That's not going to happen. You have to accept that a limit does not mean that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. The path itself, if I could take you and bring you where I am and let you experience how much that you learn, how much you grow as a person, training naturally and only going on your own power, what that does to you as a person, character-wise, and how it helps you excel in everything you do, I don't think anybody would think about using drugs. I really and truly hope this video helps you get some perspective as to the importance and the fact that there is indeed a benefit to following a natural way. And I hope my experience helps you with yours. Thanks for tuning in, and Excelsior.